Hi everyone. Well, in light of recent events in the world, Sanctuary has made the decision to offer our small group study, the Sanctuary course, for free. We're doing this to provide a resource for you to use in community to open up a conversation about faith and mental health. You'll see a separate online guide on our website that provides suggestions for how to create a shared learning experience in community, even when your community isn't in the same room. We hope you'll take this opportunity to access the course and to use it. You know, I have a friend who recently used social media to relay a story from the church that he works in. Apparently last Sunday a congregant offered their hand out for a handshake, and my friend politely declined, as is perfectly acceptable given current circumstances. To which the person who had been denied a handshake quipped, "Well, if you have faith in Jesus, you won't get coronavirus. You must have feeble faith." I feel like there's a lot going on in this one interaction captured on social media. For us at Sanctuary, we wanted to offer a word of encouragement for all those who are feeling anxious or misunderstood, or being told they don't have enough faith, and for those that are implicitly or explicitly being made to feel like second-class Christians at the moment because of these understandable anxious feelings, which can be overwhelming. At a time when anxiety levels are so high in our culture, it is easy to read passages from the Bible and feel condemned by them, usually because of an overly simplistic reading of the text. For instance, repeatedly in the Old Testament, we are commanded by God not to fear. It was assumed that my friend who refused a handshake was lacking in faith, but I don't think he was primarily motivated by fear or a lack of faith. I think he was being socially responsible, which is actually a form of love. However, I'm concerned that for many of us, our feelings of anxiety can unfortunately and mistakenly be equated to or conflated with a lack of faith. And yet I believe the very opposite is in fact true. To lean into our feelings, however hard they might be for us or for others, and to keep going is a picture of faith in action. People living with anxiety disorders are in fact some of the bravest people I know. Last month I was interviewing the theologian, Professor Chris Cook, at the University of Durham in England for a new upcoming resource that we're creating. Chris is not only a theologian but also an ordained Anglican priest and a psychiatrist. And Chris was talking about the Apostle Paul's exhortation in Philippians 4 verse 6, where he says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God." Chris was denouncing the overly simplistic reading that basically makes anyone who's experiencing anxiety feel like they're failing at faith. Instead, Chris was saying that Paul was encouraging believers to put in place some practices to help them overcome anxiety, practices like prayer. Paul wasn't saying the experiences of anxiety are invalid, but rather do some things to help you get through times of anxiety. And as Chris spoke, I suddenly had this revelation that to respond to this call to be anxious for nothing and the other biblical calls not to fear will actually look very different for each of us. Indeed, it may look like the call to seek the help of a therapist, to talk to a friend or family member, to practice self-care, to sleep well, to listen to music, to watch a favourite movie. These practices are not opposed to the command to not be anxious or fearful. These feelings do not demonstrate a lack of faith. Rather, to carry these feelings honestly and to keep going in the life of faith and to actively seek practices to help manage these feelings is in fact to demonstrate profound faith and remain faithful to the biblical text. We are called to a faith which says, "I am so committed to not living in fear that I'm going to talk to someone about my fears, to bring them into the open, to resist the urge to stuff them down and instead to speak up." Now, I know how scary this can be. Indeed, for someone in the midst of a mental health crisis, it can take unfathomable strength and bravery to reach out to someone else and to make yourself seen or heard, for fear of judgment, or maybe for fear of someone claiming that you have feeble faith. If you are feeling fearful, the best thing you can do is to talk to a trusted friend, to seek help, and to create an appropriate rhythm of self-care for yourself, which will look different for each of us. You can also develop self-care practices which may include nutrition, rhythms of rest, spiritual practices, prayer, a regular phone conversation with friends, meditation, fasting, or feasting. But I urge you to find that rhythm and to resist the temptation to walk this path alone. I actually messaged my good friend, Professor John Swinton, one of Sanctuary's ambassadors and a world-renowned practical theologian, and I asked him his take on the whole biblical theme of do not fear, particularly in the context of so much understandable anxiety right now. And his response was so profound, I thought that I would share it in full. John says, well, firstly, anxiety is understandable. After all, there is something to be anxious about. But it's not necessarily what we think. Anxiety leads to fear. Fear leads to lovelessness. Lovelessness is the opposite of the gospel. The thing I notice here is that many people seem to placate themselves by finding consolation in the fact that it is only the elderly or people with underlying conditions that are at risk. That is certainly one way of dealing with anxiety, but there is a kind of odd implicit eugenics to that conversation that is not healthy. Some governments of this world have basically taken that stance in its response to the crisis. I was recently visiting an aquarium, and one of the attendants was saying that the sharks in the aquarium do a good job of eating the sick and weak fish in their tanks, which keeps the other fish healthy. That had a strange resonance with the times that we are in. The second thing that I see is just how shallow and thin our society is. The way in which people hoard food and drink, knowing full well that in doing so they put the weaker members of society at risk, is pretty troubling. Any philanthropy within society falls away very quickly when something like this emerges. So anxiety can ultimately lead to the discarding of the weakest amongst us. As Christians, we can be anxious. In fact, Jesus was pretty anxious during his passion. But we need to be aware of being fearful, as that is when things can start to go horribly wrong, as people forget to love. So holding on to love is the key, with or without your experiences of anxiety. So may you hold on to love in these times. And even more than that, may you know that love holds on to you. On behalf of all of us at Sanctuary, may the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace.